there, emerging expat. You're tuned in to Let's Move to Portugal. I'm Victoria from ExpatsEverywhere's podcast, and I have the distinct honor of bringing you YouTube travelers and our resident Portugal experts, ExpatsEverywhere's Josh and Kaylee. Each week they'll inspire, they'll educate, and they'll accompany you on your journey to Portuguese residency. This week on Let's Move to Portugal, Miriam shares her experiences of living in different countries, obtaining citizenship, and the challenges of moving to Portugal. She also discusses the themes of cultural diversity, language acquisition, and the transformative experience of living in a foreign country.
Hey expats and travelers, welcome back to Expats Everywhere Presents Let's Move to Portugal podcast. Kaylee, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. Feeling good.
Feeling good.
Feeling good.
Yeah? Why feeling good?
I don't know. We've just been able to accomplish a lot over the weekend and feeling good.
All right. Portuguese lessons are going well.
They are.
We had a 3-day weekend, which was nice, right?
Yep. If you're unfamiliar with the format of this podcast, we start out with a little weekly welcome, catching you up to speed on what's happening in the world of expats everywhere. And then we jump into the main portion of the episode, which is an interview with Miriam. And we'll get to that in just a second. But what's been happening?
So we've, have our Portuguese lessons that we've been doing online, which are going well.
Yep.
Halfway through? About halfway?
Not quite
almost.
There, but almost.
I'm telling myself halfway. Makes it feel like it's good.
Yeah.
like we're halfway through. So we have that going on. And then we put out a vlog video this past weekend, which was fun for me because a friend who I met in Singapore, if you don't know, we used to live in Singapore, and a really good friend of mine came to visit us here in Portugal.
Yes.
She had never been, first time. So we went out to the Douro, of course.
Yeah.
So she hadn't had Vinha Verde, and I was very surprised at what she liked out there. The different, I'm going to just leave a cliffhanger there so that you go watch it.
and she grew up in California, so she was used to, well, not just Californian wines, but wines from all over. She's a wine fan.
Loves wine, yes.
Yeah.
And so I was surprised what she liked. Unfortunately, they don't really ship to Singapore. so we'll have to take her a bottle. Maybe, it would be nice, actually, if we could take her something when we go, because we are going in September. But
It'll fly a lot with us, though.
Yeah.
It will.
It's a funny way to put it. We'll have it for a while.
I did not go on this trip because one of us has to work. So.
Aha, that's not what
it is. It was a ladies' thing.
A ladies' thing. Yeah. Well, last time...
You needed to reconnect with her.
Yes, catch up. But last time we did this when friends came in, we dropped our daughter off at school and we did that. And then we hit really bad weather coming back in, and we were so delayed getting back to pick our daughter up from school. And I just was worried that would happen again. But speaking of Sia, man, we can't take her out to the Douro anymore, at least for a while. She gets car sick. Yeah, so we found that out the hard way. Tested it out again the hard way.
Yes.
And we've been out to like Jerez, which is also kind of windy, so just having to drive really slowly. That one's not as bad because when you get deep into the Douro, it's windy for a long time.
Yep.
But at least Jerez is not as bad. But yeah.
Yep. Okay, so restaurant highlight. We checked out a new restaurant a couple days ago, and actually it was with viewers turned patrons turned friends that live in Gaia, so just across the river from Porto in Gaia, and it was called Real Cervejaria or Cervejaria Real. Real Cervejaria. Good. I'd say like mid-range price point. The establishment was really nice.
It was
large.
Big, yeah.
It was really large.
Had some different beers, so you could try. I had Erdinger just because I haven't had it in a while, so I thought, well.
That's a good one.
Yeah, you had a good one too.
I know, a fruit beer.
A fruit beer, yeah. It was tasty.
Low calorie, low ABV.
That's funny. But
Not intentional, it just looked good.
The food was good.
Looked like a good choice for a warm day.
I'll tell you what. Sia likes the cheese boards, and this was a really good cheese board.
Yeah, especially for the price. $10.50. There were 4 different cheeses, and a lot of it, she obviously didn't finish it, so we
got to try it.
We got to try it.
It came with olives, honey, crackers, a couple different types of crackers. It was actually quite impressive for a cheese board.
Yeah. So, not sponsored, but shout out to Real Cervejaria.
Right.
Okay, so I've been working on another video for Let's Get Building with Josh and Kaylee, where we take you on our real estate adventure here in Portugal. And I hope to have that out next week. It's a little tricky. We didn't film it so well, but yeah.
But somewhat recently, I went up the crane even further.
No.
And we got more lemons, so that was good.
Yes, and we've tried to get the drone up, but every time we get it up, the seagulls attack it.
So it is like a beacon. They just come to it.
The seagulls are very territorial, and they do attack. Yeah. So that's not fun.
Oh gosh.
Anything happening in the world of like, I don't know, bureaucracy,
Nothing
immigration
new there.
changes?
I mean, all the new stuff kind of happened a few weeks ago, a month ago, I guess by now in June.
Yeah.
So we did talk with Diogo, an immigration lawyer, about that on episode 2. So that's out if you want more. We've spoken with Angie a little bit about bureaucracy. We're going to be putting something out as well about some things to be aware of that'll go on the main channel. But no, nothing too new yet. Still a lot in the works.
Okay, so I've got something to announce for anybody that is into FC Porto and also Cristiano Ronaldo. Next month, so in August, there's going to be a friendly match between FC Porto and Ronaldo's Saudi Arabian team, Al Nassr. And the tickets actually have gone on sale. So by the time you're listening to this, I think that they'll be up for general admission and maybe sold out. But try to get a ticket.
So if you want to see Ronaldo in Porto.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll be it. So that'll be interesting. It's kind of fun that they did that.
Mm-hmm.
So we will take C to the game because it is earlier, not a super late one.
Yeah.
So that'll be good. Oh, and one other thing too, Expats Everywhere Explorers, we will be putting out a country guide on Spain this week. So on our other channel there, if you want to know a bit more about Spain, then you can pop over there.
Yep. So our guest this week is Miriam, who is an expat living in the Cascais area.
Cascais, yeah, that's there.
We've had her on the main channel before, actually. It's been 3 years.
3 years ago when we were there, yeah. When we did that big tour of Portugal and we stopped and stayed in Cascais, we had her.
Yep.
She was great. So nice. Great family.
Amazing interviewee.
Yes.
Yeah, really speaks really well, better than I'm doing right now. So, no, she's amazing. So I had the pleasure to interview her this time.
Because it was me first time.
It was you the first time. We talked about a lot of different topics that you all didn't really get to.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Because she just came out with another book, and it wasn't really like a book, like a publicity interview at all.
Oh no, she's an author. That's what she does.
Yeah, so we just had a conversation about passport privilege, which is a topic that comes up every now and then. I think certainly for Americans, we can be quite blind to passport privilege and chalk certain cultural things up to other things, but it might just be passport privilege. Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, she basically goes on and talks about her living experiences in different countries. She talks about obtaining citizenships, the challenges of moving to Portugal. She also breaks down, what it's like raising kids in different parts of the world, really, different schooling. And yeah, it was just a really fascinating conversation. I think that she'll be a person that we'll have on the podcasts more.
Again, she's just a wealth of knowledge. So she's got a lot of information and it's easy to talk to her about all of it. So
yeah, she keeps her ear to the ground when it comes to stuff as well. So she knows a lot.
Okay.
We also talk about economic privilege, and we get into a little bit of economics, which might be helpful for people moving here and worried about how they can either support or not contribute to gentrification, let's say. So we go into that, and we hope that you enjoy the episode. Feel free. We're going to put chapters, at least if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to put chapters so that you can skip around if you'd like to do that. We'd love to have you listen to the whole darn thing. But if you want to skip around, we get it. You know that not everything applies to you. If you're listening on a podcasting stream, enjoy the whole thing. Let's get to it.
Let's go.
All right, before we get started, let's talk about this week's sponsor, Green Ocean Advisors.
Well, I think the world right now can feel a little chaotic, but that doesn't mean that your finances have to, because I think when your finances feel chaotic, everything is just out of whack, right?
Yep, and Green Ocean Advisors will help you put together a plan to weather all those financial storms that may come your way. It's a little tricky whenever you make a move. You're often asking yourself questions like, is it time to invest in AI? What's up with that?
Ooh, AI, that's a good one. Or how about crypto? I think a lot of people talk about crypto or Bitcoin when it comes to Portugal because of the taxes. So is that for you?
Maybe closer to home is, should I sell my home before moving to Portugal, or should I rent it out?
Everyone's situation really is different, so it's good to talk to a financial advisor about your specific portfolio before you make the move, or even if you're already in Portugal.
Now, click the link in the description section below or in the show notes, depending on how you're consuming this right here. And be sure to click the one that gets you a free 15-minute consultation. It's specifically to Expats Everywhere. Thank you, John, for that. Now, on to the show. Miriam, I'm really excited to have this conversation because last time I saw you was actually when my wife interviewed you. So it was 2021, and we were down in Cascais, and you and Kaylee had an awesome, sunny interview. I recommend people to check that interview out. We'll do something a little different in this podcast today, where we'll talk about some different topics that maybe you didn't get into with Kaylee. But how's everything in Cascais? What's life like there right now?
Thank you so much, Josh. And I'm excited. This time I get to, chat with you. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Life in Cascais is good. It's good. It's the mad rush, the end of the school year. We just have a few more weeks to go. So everyone's like in a mad rush to get everything finished. And then it will officially be summer.
Awesome. So you and your husband are working professionals. You've got a couple of kids in school. What is it like with this kind of dynamic, being working professionals and having school-age kids in Portugal? Because it's not, let's say, the most common expats that we meet in Portugal, is it?
No, maybe not. Yeah, it's interesting. So my husband, has a very corporate job, thankfully with a lot of flexibility. So there's a lot of work from home. His office is technically in Lisbon. We live in Cascais, but he, goes in a few days and then works the rest from home. So there's a lot of flexibility regarding his work. And then there's a lot of travel as well. So quite often I'm the one holding down the fort while he's off, traveling on a business trip. That's a little bit about his work. And of course, I'm a writer, so I have the privilege of working from home, which does give us a lot of flexibility because, as you mentioned, we do have 3 kids. I have a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3.5-year-old. And so we've got one in middle school, one in elementary, and one who goes to like a Portuguese creche or a kindergarten. And, everyone has different pick and drop times. Everyone has different school projects. I'm on 3 different class WhatsApp groups. This is parenting in 2024. I think what I will say is that in Portugal, we are lucky to enjoy a great work-life balance, which makes having this hectic family of 5 and managing everyone's schedules a little bit easier than it might be the case in other parts of the world. We have, family-friendly policies. We have a lot of sick leave. We have flexibility. We also have now, after being in Portugal for 4 years, built up a good support system, which is also very important when you're living abroad.
Awesome. Let's give a little context to your background, because you've lived abroad for quite some time, extensive traveling. Your kids are multilingual, multicultural, multinational as well. So give us a bit of your background for those that haven't seen the interview that you did with Kaylee.
Sure, I'll give you the short version, Josh.
Please.
which is that basically I've been moving, and I call myself jokingly an expat since birth. So I have lived in 10 countries. I am 41 years old today. I have lived in 10 countries and 4 continents. I grew up moving. So in my early childhood, I was born in Pakistan, but I grew up in Bahrain, New York, and then Pakistan. So by the age of 10, I had lived in these 3 countries. So that's sort of where my global, childhood was based. After that, I continued moving. I left Pakistan at the age of 18, almost 19, with a blue suitcase in my hand and a one-way ticket to Boston's Logan Airport. I went back to the US right after 9/11, and I lived in Massachusetts and I lived in Texas, which is maybe should count as a whole other country. But I should have needed a passport. But I also then have lived in the United Kingdom, which is where I met my half German, half Italian husband. I then moved to Germany for love. I lived in Berlin. After Berlin, I moved to Copenhagen, and we lived in Copenhagen for 4 years. This was due to his work. My husband works in international shipping. And then the rest of our international moves happened because of his work in international shipping. After Copenhagen, we moved to Singapore, which is where I became a mom. My first child was born in Singapore. After Singapore, we moved to Dubai, which is where my second child was born. After Dubai, we moved to Accra, Ghana, in West Africa, where I had no child, but I birthed a book. And after that, we left in the middle of the pandemic and moved here to Portugal in July 2020, where I have birthed a child and a book. So I guess Portugal has been really good for me.
Awesome. First and foremost, happy birthday. I did not realize today was your birthday, so thank you for spending your birthday with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, so a ton of countries that you have lived in, and really different countries. I mean, there's some crossover between a few of them, but not totally. Let's touch a bit on your passport situation. So you have an Italian passport through your husband, is that right? Italian citizenship?
I do. I am Pakistani by birth, and I am Italian through marriage. So I have both passports. Yeah.
Both passports. Okay. And you moved here basically being an EU citizen.
That's right.
Is that right?
I'm in, yes, exactly. In Portugal, I moved as an Italian citizen. It was a lot easier being from an EU country.
What was that process like? Because we're finding that more and more Americans in our audience are let's say, getting into the ancestral ties and getting not visas, but getting their citizenship through places like Italy. What is it like making the move from a bureaucratic standpoint like that?
Well, I always try to be as brutally honest.
Please.
So, from a bureaucratic standpoint, it's pretty bureaucratic. You have to prepare yourself for a long process, a long drawn out process. But the good thing is, if you are applying through citizenship, if it's Italian citizenship through marriage or through ancestry, the good thing is you can't really be refused. It's just a question of getting on top of the paperwork and making sure you fit all the requirements. And there's just a lot of paperwork to keep on top of. But you shouldn't really lose hope, because it is a long drawn out process. But in the end, you're going to be successful. It's just a question of, just not getting frustrated with all the paperwork. I applied for Italian citizenship while I still lived in Denmark. You have to be married for at least 3 years before you can apply. Okay. And by the time I got the citizenship, we'd moved from Denmark to Singapore. So I officially became an Italian citizen in Singapore. The whole process took almost three years. So it's, you're going to take that amount of time, but that you're going to get it in the end. So that should be what, keeps you going.
Sure. And then your move from, let's say, being an Italian citizen, moving to Portugal, what was the settling process like? What did you have to go through from a technical standpoint or immigration standpoint? Because it's different than those who have to get a visa.
Yeah, it was super easy, Josh. It was nothing, really. I had barely any bureaucracy to go through. I, as an EU citizen with an Italian passport, moving to Portugal was very, very simple and very straightforward, and I'd say pain-free. I just had to get registered here and get my residence permit, and that was really it. I don't remember doing anything else. I did have a driver's license from Dubai, from the UAE. Now converting that into a Portuguese one was a whole other story. Hard, very hard. Also during the pandemic, everything took twice as long. So I kind of have to mention that as well. But as far as, coming here as to reside and getting my paperwork process, I know that other people have had a much harder time, especially if you're coming in from the US. And I was very lucky I didn't have to go through all that on an EU passport.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, speaking of the passport thing, the driver's license thing, I did my exchange like end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And then I went for basically biometrics or whatever at an office in Faro. And I think because we were living in Porto at the time, but we happened to be down in Faro and got an appointment,
Yeah.
There was mad misconnection. So I get the actual license number. I get an email and a confirmation of that. And to this day, I still don't have a physical driver's license card.
Oh.
And I've just recently written them again saying like, hey, it must have gotten lost in the mail for the third time. but
Oh my
but let's see if I
gosh.
get that thing.
I would love to say I'm surprised by this story, but truthfully, I'm not that surprised or, taken aback, because this is a story of so many people. And I mean, sadly, it can be such a hassle. I had to go through great lengths as well. I was at the UAE embassy in Lisbon trying to certify documents. My American driver's license had expired, and thus I had a UAE license. And my license was from Texas, the American one. There was no way I was going to go and fly back there, and it was too complicated. So I thought I'll just use the Dubai one and get it switched to a Portuguese one. But it did take me almost 8 to 10 months. I was very lucky that was the pandemic, and I didn't really need to drive anywhere because we were all in lockdown. So it didn't feel so long.
Okay, before we switch gears and dive really into Portugal, let's chat a bit about the passport situation. So you have an Italian passport, and I'd like to ask you, do you see any need to get a Portuguese citizenship? Because you're coming up on the 5 years of living in Portugal. Is that something that you and your husband have talked about? What's the kid's status? Yeah.
Sure, that's a great question. I think passport privilege is real. And as I mentioned, I have a Pakistani passport, which I have as a result of being born there. And now I have an Italian passport. And I have traveled to over 50 countries on the Pakistani passport, and moved to different countries. I've gotten student visas, tourist visas, residence visas, you name it. And it has been such a hassle, Josh. And now, on an Italian passport, I'm not a different person, but I can clearly see the passport privilege that I carry. I can easily live or work in Europe without jumping through any big hoops. And to answer your question truthfully, I actually don't really feel the need to get Portuguese citizenship, just because it would be pretty much the same thing. It would just say EU Portugal as opposed to EU Italy. And as far as our kids are concerned, our kids have 3 citizenships already and 3 passports already. So they have German citizenship, Italian citizenship, and Pakistani citizenship. And they have 3 passports as well, even though they were born in Singapore, Dubai, and Lisbon. But Singapore and Dubai don't give you a passport if you're born there. Lisbon or Portugal would. But so far, we're so tired of the bureaucracy. We haven't really pursued that. Also, because it would be just the same thing. EU Germany, EU Portugal, it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, so there's no real benefit then. Once you have an EU citizenship, there's no real benefit to having a different country's citizenship, at least from that regard. Yeah,
from a practical standpoint, it's just the same. So there's no real need.
Okay, cool. Anything else you want to talk about passport privilege, or is that kind of the main thing?
I think that's the main thing, but I think that unless you've experienced it, you might not be aware of perhaps your own passport privilege. So many people who have never been pulled out of lines at immigration or singled out for their passport don't really know how uncomfortable that experience feels like. I have been pulled out of a line at JFK as a teenager on my Pakistani passport and been asked, do you know where Osama bin Laden is hiding? That was my experience as a Pakistani. Sheesh. And now when I travel on an Italian passport, I get, flirts and congratulations if the Azzurri have won their latest football match, And I think what makes it so jarring is that, you are treated so differently. It's not even about the color of your skin. You're simply treated so differently based on the paper you're holding in your hand. And once you've experienced both sides of it, the lack of privilege and the privilege, it is so clear to see what an unfair system this is. Why does one piece of paper make me more trustworthy and allows me visa-free access into a country than the other when I'm the same person? So that's been a huge lesson in my global life.
Okay. Ready to switch gears, chat a bit about Portugal?
Of course.
Okay. What was it like in 2020 settling into life in Portugal?
Hard, very, very hard. We didn't really have a choice. We were moved in terms of a corporate relocation. It's not that we were planning ourselves to move to Portugal and we could decide or choose the best time. Maybe we would not have chosen the middle of the pandemic then. We didn't have a choice. We are corporate employees and we are told when we're going to move and then we move. And so that has been our life. So we couldn't really control the timing. The timing had to be July of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. The reason it was hard, Josh, was because there were a lot of complicating factors and a lot of different layers into that particular move. I think I definitely covered a bit of it with Kaylee in our previous talk, where I talked about being pregnant with our third child and then going into preterm labor at 26 weeks. So day 4 in Portugal, if you can imagine, for me, one minute I'm at Millennium Bank opening up a bank account, getting my NIF number. The next I'm in an ambulance being rushed off to a hospital because I've gone into labor way too early. So my first, 10 to 12 weeks in Portugal were very intense. We spent most of it in a hospital, first me and then our preterm a baby who spent 6 weeks in the NICU. So it was really a rough start, no matter where you moved to. And then, of course, there was the pandemic. And as soon as he came out of the NICU, Portugal went into a partial lockdown. So when you're new in a place, you want to get to know the place. You want to get to know the people. You want to be out there making connections. And we, of course, couldn't do any of that. So our first year here, we felt almost didn't count because we were all just isolating and staying home. And we had a preterm or a preemie baby who needed even more protection than perhaps the average child. So we just sort of, it was a very isolating and lonely experience. And then when things opened up, it got so much better. So it's only been uphill since then.
Nice. Okay. So 4 years on, 3.5, 4 years on. Yeah. What is life in Portugal like now? What changes have you seen? Because I know we're seeing changes up here in Porto, but what are you seeing down in the Metro Lisbon region?
There have been a lot of changes in the Cascais and Lisbon area. I see a lot more gentrification happening, quite visibly, where I see, shops and stores and cafes that were open in 2020, they are no longer there. And they've been replaced by high-end coffee shops. That's simply the reality. Or boutique stores. There's a lot of that I can visually see in Cascais. And I think that in Lisbon, perhaps it's also to a similar extent. We have the housing crisis in Lisbon. When we arrived here in 2020, there was no housing crisis, or at least, there wasn't such a big overblown, crisis going on. There was the golden visa. Everything was still functioning quite in place at that time. So I see a lot of changes. I see also a lot of positive changes though. At the time that we arrived here, it was very hard to make connections. People weren't doing events. There was no way to connect with other expats or with locals. It was just so isolating. And now I feel that, almost 4 years later, Portugal has given us so many opportunities and so many advantages to make amazing connections and friendship and really contribute to the communities here that we are a part of. So I feel like we had a very rough start, but I feel like now we have finally experienced a taste of everything this beautiful country has to offer. So we're very grateful for that because it's been an incredible experience. And I think we've done a complete 180 or even a 360 from knowing nobody, not being able to do anything, to being able to do everything and to make such amazing connections. I think that's been something very positive. And I think that last but not least, it's made us really aware of our privilege as well. We talked about passport privilege, but in this case, I would mention economic privilege. Sure. The longer we've lived here, the more we've understood our economic privilege and how important it is to be aware of that when you do move to Portugal. Moving to a new country, Josh, as you know, is a beautiful experience. Expat life is a beautiful thing. The exchange of cultures, ideas, innovation, it brings so much growth and so much creativity. But the people, the land, the culture deserve our respect. And in order to do that, it is so important that you are aware of your economic privilege when you're moving here as well.
Can we dive into that a little deeper? So, at what point do you find people gain economic privilege, whether they're a foreigner or they're a local? Like at what, let's say, income threshold do you see that, okay, now at this point you can live a very different life to the average Portuguese?
As an economist, this is something that I'm very passionate about. I was quite shocked when I learned what the minimum wage was in Portugal, because I couldn't figure out how does the average person make their ends meet. And I think that there is such a big difference between how an average Portuguese person might live versus how a wealthy corporate multinational expat might live moving to Portugal. And it's a jarring disparity. Almost, I feel we live in two different worlds, you know? So I think that, to answer your question, if you are able, first of all, to move to Portugal, you are already in an economically privileged, you know, point of view. Like, you've already got probably more privilege than the average Portuguese person here.
Okay.
It's, you know, what you have to do, I would say, is, you know, I don't know if there's a particular threshold, but you really need to research and educate yourself. What is an acceptable, you know, price to pay for rent for a 3-bedroom apartment or for a 5-bedroom house? You really have to take responsibility. You have to take responsibility for your economic imprint. For example, when I lived in Copenhagen, Denmark, I didn't feel that my economic imprint was harming a local Dane. But when I live and move to Portugal, I feel everything I do, I have a huge economic imprint, and my presence could be harming somebody else. So, you know, there are ways that you can go about doing this in a very intentional way, whether it's supporting local Portuguese businesses or it's, you know, really trying to give back to the community, be someone who's actively contributing something as well. I think that's sort of the mindset that I have approached it with. And I would say that prices and inflation and gentrification, everything is happening so fast that so many Portuguese are being priced out of their own neighborhoods, which is a very uncomfortable process for many of us to witness. So if you can afford anything over 2,000 euros per month, I think you are in an economically privileged position.
Okay. Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One is gentrification is used differently depending on the person. So do you look at gentrification as a positive, a negative, or is it a neutral word, the way I think it's probably intended to be?
You know, I'll be very honest. I waver back and forth. I think I first came to Portugal in 2010 when I lived in Copenhagen. And at the time, Lisbon looked so different to me. I was coming from a very polished Scandinavian town, right? Yeah. And Lisbon was ramshackled with graffiti on the walls. It just felt like a really completely different world. And now, if I look at Lisbon today in 2024, so many parts of it has been polished. There's so many Airbnbs. There's so many, you know, ALs. It looks so different just to me over the past decade. So I can't imagine how a Portuguese person, a local, would compare it, because it must look even more different to them. So I think gentrification can be both good and bad and neutral at the same time. It's usually a mix of the three. I think it's great that there are so many amazing opportunities for digital nomads here. There are positive aspects to the gentrification as well. But my heart aches when I see, you know, a family-run store or shop that is now going out of business because it simply can't compete with the Starbucks or with the other big chains that are offering coffee around the corner. It's the small kiosks, you know, that's where the gentrification really hits me in a negative way when I see small kiosks, for example, going out of business. Yeah. So I think gentrification, you're right. It's a very big term, and it could be a bit of everything. I do appreciate how many avenues there are, for example, to learn Portuguese. Maybe you could argue that the gentrification in terms of learning Portuguese and classes and tutors and all of that, which has exploded, has been a really positive thing. So yeah, you gotta qualify your statement, and it's a bit of good, bad, and neutral. thrown in together.
Okay. And I get a sense that there's maybe a little bit of like a burden that you have when like living your daily life because of the financial privilege that you have. Is that an accurate statement?
I think it's definitely a responsibility. I don't know if I view it as a burden necessarily, but I am very conscious about it, more so than I have been in other places. In Singapore, my presence in Singapore didn't really spell trouble for anybody else, right? So Portugal is different, and I think it is wise to be aware of that, because what I really worry is that if we aren't aware of our own privileges, whether they're economic or they're passport related, we could end up really living in a bubble, and B, really being alienated from the locals, and C, suffering a huge backlash where people coming in are blamed for all the problems, whether it's housing or taxation or, municipal issues or whatever it is. So I think it's very important to A, think about what your presence means for the local population, and B, figure out a way that you can use your skills to contribute positively or give back to society. Because I think that would then help in terms of your responsibility and your economic footprint.
Okay, so those are some tactics that people can use if they're starting to feel a burden, or even just to be aware of what their economic impact could have here in Portugal. I think, hearing you describe the situation of Lisbon and Cascais, it's slightly different than what we're seeing in Porto. Certainly when it comes to the shops, yes, we're seeing specialty coffee shops open up, but it doesn't seem to be at the expense of the local shops. What you do tend to find is the profile of person that would go to a specialty coffee place versus the local cafes are different.
Yeah.
But the spaces aren't being taken over. The specialty coffee shops aren't taking over the old cafes. The old cafes are continuing to run. And then this, let's say, vacant storefront that's been vacant even since before COVID is now actually gaining life. So in that regard, I think we're seeing something positive happening here with more foreigners that have moved to the city. But I think Lisbon's probably a good 3-4 years ahead of where Porto is in that portion of economic development, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your rents are higher there. Like 2,000 for us is something really nice. Yeah. Whereas I think in Lisbon now that's become like it's good. You know,
absolutely.
Which is crazy.
Absolutely. It's crazy. And I think the rents have really exploded in Lisbon. And keep in mind, we're actually in Cascais, which everyone is saying is even worse in terms of, so if you take Lisbon and put us 2 steps ahead, I think that's where Cascais would fall. So I think, I would never tell anybody not to move anywhere, because that's something I've done my whole life. And it's such an enriching process for both the person doing it, but also for the place and the people and the exchange, like I said, of ideas and cultures and languages and all of that. But I think my takeaway would be do it in a responsible and educated and informed way, right? Because then you're not going to be surprised and you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're actually approaching your expat life or your life in Portugal, if you're here for the long term, in a very intentional, conscious way, which is going to help you make good decisions and help you, feel at home. So it's an important thing to do.
Well, you have a big passion for actually helping expats transition and be aware of a multitude of things that can confront them as they are moving abroad or settling into their new place. And that's something that I think that you go through in your books. You just released a new book. Can you tell us what that book is about? We haven't read it yet. So
Sure. My second book, which is actually my debut novel, just came out. It's called The Guilty Can't Say Goodbye, and it's set here in Portugal. So it is set in Cascais and in Lisbon. And And this is my way of promoting literature based in Portugal in a responsible way, where I have Portugal almost as a main character in the book. So I have three women who are the main characters, plus Portugal, who is also one of my main characters, because the idea is to look at a place and see how does it affect us and shape us into who we become. And so Portugal is a central character in these women's lives who move to Portugal looking for a fresh start, but they have all these secrets from their past that are holding them back and keep coming up. And it's an interesting play at cross-cultural societies, at multicultural identities. And of course, it begs the question, where does the person end and where does the place begin? And how does each place that we live in shape us into who we become?
Oh, that's cool. Okay, I'm looking forward to reading it, because I think Kaylee and I have certainly experienced it through the different places that we've lived. And actually, there were certain times living in two of the countries, I won't name them on the podcast, where Kaylee was like, I don't like the person I'm becoming because of this place. Like, because there are certain cultural differences between the US and then those countries, whereby to assimilate to those countries, you have to change a bit.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to change and become more like that, then it's probably time to move on, which is what we did. I mean, we realized like, this doesn't fit us. You know?
Yeah, that's a very interesting way. It doesn't fit us. See, certain places are a very good fit with who we are, and certain places are not. So that's sort of what the book explores as well, because Portugal is Portugal, but each of my three women, I have one Asian, one American, and one African. So you've got a very diverse pair of eyes looking at the experience of moving to Portugal. And they're doing everything that you and I have done, Josh, where they're taking Portuguese lessons. They're trying to understand the local culture. They're trying to speak the local language. They're navigating parenting and everything in a foreign environment that is foreign to them, and trying to, build community and get a sense of their new life. And, the idea is to show that, look, Portugal is the same, but their experiences are different because the three women are very different. They come from very different backgrounds, and they have a very different lens or a prism through which they're viewing their new life. So it's an interesting look at how much does our personality, how much does our mindset matter in influencing what kind of experience we have when we move to a new country like Portugal. So I hope it will get people thinking and turning those pages, and also being able to relate to it with their own experiences.
That's neat. Did you have a particular person in mind for each character, like someone that you had met, or was this a kind of a culmination of the different countries that you had lived in? You were able to gather cultural points of reference to then move that character into Portugal.
I've been getting this question a lot, and also being asked if I am these women. And I just like to say that, these three women are based on many of the people who I have met abroad. Who I have come across in my 10 countries, 4 continents around the world. And I think that sometimes when we read novels or we read expat fiction, everybody, it's like, 3 Americans moved to, Hong Kong. That's the story of The Expatriates, which is starring Nicole Kidman now on Netflix. Or you've got, In Every Mirror She's Black, where it's 3 Black women who move to Sweden and have to adjust in a homogenous white, society, which is all great. But, Josh, when you've moved to Saudi Arabia, or you've moved to Singapore, or you've moved to Spain, or you're in Portugal, you're meeting people from all over the world, right? You're not just meeting one type of person. And I think I really wanted to reflect the richness and diversity of experiences and of the people we meet when we do live abroad, because that's one of the best things. We meet people we may not have met had we not moved or never left home, right? That 100%. Is where the richness is coming from. So I really wanted to take you inside the minds of 3 very different women who have different perspectives, different experiences, different skin tones, different view of the world, put them in the same place, which is Portugal, the melting pot of Portugal, and then see how they go about building these new lives. So I hope it will be interesting for anybody who is embarking on this process to get a taste of it, because the novel is based in current day or present day Portugal. I wrote it in 2022, and that's when the novel takes place. It's 2022 and you're in Portugal. So I hope it will give a good insight also as to what to expect. And I hope it will really make you think about all these themes of guilt, guilt for the life you might be leaving, guilt for, the decisions you're making, all of these experiences that we share in common.
Super interesting, because for the listener, it's important to realize that Portugal has roots in Asia, in Africa, and North America, all happening at different times throughout history. North America more kind of modern, let's say in the past 100 years, where you had Portuguese that left Portugal, went to the U.S., especially kind of the northeast part of the U.S., or to Canada. Azorians moving to Canada, moving to different parts of the U.S. as well. So there's kind of those cultural ties, but then also the cultural ties in Asia, whether it be Goa or Macau or other parts of Southeast Asia that have influenced, especially culinarily, have influenced that region. And then Africa, you have several Portuguese speaking countries that are, let's say, south of where we are. So super interesting that you chose those three regions of the world to have your characters be based from. I love it. That's really interesting. I look forward to reading the book for sure.
I hope so. You'll have to let me know what you think.
Cool. Let's jump back into Portugal and chat just a bit about like what's happening in Cascais and what the demographic scene is like there. Are you noticing more foreigners in Cascais? Like, yeah, what's the pulse there right now?
I think I would say yes. I guess to just provide context, and like we've already mentioned, when I did move here in July 2020, it was the middle of the pandemic. So not a lot of people were moving to Cascais or to Portugal.
Right.
We were one of the very few. And now if I compare from 2020 to 2024, yes, there are so many people moving to Cascais, such that, all the schools here have waiting lists for you to get into. I think that's a pretty good indication.
That was going to be a question.
Yeah. I think for
that was
me,
going to be a question.
as a parent, that's a big indication that the demand is truly outstripping supply. And we see that in crazy long wait lists. We see that as soon as there's a spot open, there's literally a family pulled off the wait list and ushered into school. So I think that you are definitely seeing a huge influx of a huge demand as well of people moving to Cascais. And definitely it's very popular to move here in 2024.
What's the reason that there are so many international schools kind of out in that area? Is it land availability? Is it being proximity to where a lot of the foreigners live?
This is a good question, because when we were moving here, we assumed that most of the schools would be in Lisbon, right? Like we thought we would be living in Lisbon, because that's of course where all the schools would be, and we'd have the most choice. But that's not.
It's the capital.
Ironically, it's the capital. Yeah. That's what we were thinking, but that's not the case. So I don't know what came first, but I think that because all the schools are settled and based in Cascais and in Sintra, that's why you see a lot of families with school age kids moving to these locations, because of course it's beautiful. Of course you have a lot of nature and access to nature that you might not have in a very urban setting if you are a school in Lisbon. So I think that's why the schools are based here. And then of course it just follows that wherever the schools are based, that's where families decide to settle as well, because they don't want a long commute, or they don't want to put their kids in a bus that takes forever to get to school. So I think it's sort of like it's a cycle, and that's why you see a lot of families choosing to settle in Cascais or in Sintra because you've got the forest, you've got the Sintra Mountains, you've got Guincho, the beach. You can do everything, from rock climbing to hiking to trekking. I mean, it's got everything that a family would want to, have access to. So I think that's why you see a lot of families with kids moving to Cascais.
Okay.
And you can see that a lot of times people are working in Lisbon, living in Cascais, or they're like us, working in Lisbon, living in Cascais, and our kids go to school in Sintra. So we're covering all bases there. But I think that's definitely one of the reasons.
Okay. You all have a car?
We do.
You own a
We
car?
have
Okay.
one car. So unlike our Dubai days where we had, each had our own car because that's the desert. You got to survive. There's no public transportation. But here, we live really close to the train station. And so, we've kept only one car, and it's mostly used for school pickup and drop off, or if we go away for like the weekend. But we use public transport a lot as well, or we just walk a lot as well. So it's a good mix.
Do you find that most people that live where you do have a car or cars, and it's for kind of that utility to drop the kids off, pick them up? Is it necessary to have a car? Could one rely on public transportation alone?
I think one could rely on public transportation. I know a lot of families, for instance, who live very close to our kids' school. They just walk over to school, or the kids are just biking to school. It's really all about your choices. We don't live as close to school, so we definitely do use our car. We live close to the train station so that my husband can go back and forth, take the train into Lisbon, doesn't need to drive. So we've got a bit of that flexibility going on. So I would say that you could easily choose to live close to school and then just walk or bike to school. That's very possible in this area as well. And a lot of families we know, they do that.
Okay, cool. Well, Miriam, we tend to ask the same question at the end of every episode, but Kaylee actually already asked you this question, and I assume that the answer hasn't changed about living abroad transforms lives. How has living abroad transformed your life? So instead, because I'll just ask people to go and watch that interview if they want to hear your answer. I'll ask you, what's your message for people? And if people can reach out to you, how should they contact you?
Sure. Well, my message would be that living abroad is one of the most amazing experiences you can have for yourself or for your family. I always say that once you learn a new language, it's the best gift because nobody can ever take that away from you. Even when you've left a particular country, if you can still speak that language, you stay connected. I say this with experience, speaking many different languages and having learned many more and trying to butcher many more. But if I can still speak Danish today, I still remain connected to Denmark, even though I haven't lived there in over a decade. So make the effort to learn the language because regardless of how long you stay, that is going to be a gift that you keep for life. Nobody can ever take that away from you. I think that is something so precious. It's the best gift that anybody could give themselves. So focus on those intangible gifts of living abroad, that truly give you so much value, so much perspective, so much learning, so much access in the long run, and you can't go wrong. And as far as how to reach me is concerned, you're very welcome to, I have a website which you can visit. You're really welcome to visit that. It's just my name, mariamnavedotimofjord.com, which is quite a long name. I might ask Josh to put that in the show notes.
We'll definitely put it in the show notes. Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, you can find me on Instagram as well or on Facebook as well. So I'm happy to connect with readers.
Cool.
And
yeah,
listeners.
We'll tag you there. And then how can people order your book if they're interested in that?
Oh,
on the
sure.
website?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can go to Amazon Spain and order it through there or through Barnes & Noble or really any way you order books online. But you can also go into a physical bookstore and find it there. If you're in Cascais, I'd recommend you go to Indie Bookshop in this Cascais Citadel. And if you're in Lisbon, the book will be coming out more and more in bookstores there. So just keep an eye out for it. And if you don't see it, you can just ask for it and they will order it for you. So that's also another option.
Sweet. That's awesome. Okay. So we'll put those links in the show notes or the description section on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. Miriam, thank you so much for this awesome interview. And I'm sure we'll have you back again. Look forward to seeing you in the flesh at some point when we get down to Cascais.
Thank you so much, Josh. It's always a pleasure having these chats with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.